So I think you can close it now.
Oh, is that it? Okay, cool.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Everybody ready? All right. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in to watch. Christos Anesti, Christ is risen. First, let me start off by saying it's nice to be with people again. I know that many of us have been cooped up at home for the last couple of years, and it's nice to be able to see and interact, and hopefully we'll have many more days like this in the future. So as I'm sure you all remember, the resurrection of Christ, the Feast of the Resurrection, was last week, and there's more to the story that happens after the resurrection of Christ, and we know that in the days after the resurrection that Christ was still at work in terms of showing us what was to come, showing us why it is that he came for us and he died for us. And the story that the Bible tells us that happened, especially around this time, like the week after the resurrection, is the story of doubting St. Thomas. And we call him doubting St. Thomas because I think it talks about how he, even though he had heard about the appearance of Christ to the apostles in the days after the resurrection, St. Thomas still didn't believe. So we're going to be delving a little bit into that today to try to understand where St. Thomas was coming from, and also try to understand what Christ was thinking in terms of how to respond to St. Thomas's reaction. And I think we'll find that there's a lot that we can take in terms of what we do or how we process information, not just about our relationship with Christ, but I think also just things that happen in our lives in general. So we'll be talking about that today. So I'll start first by just briefly or quickly reading what the Gospel of John tells us about this part of the story. So at this point, Christ had already appeared to the 10 apostles. They had seen him immediately or shortly after the resurrection. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 24 to 29, it says, "But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. And the other disciples said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe." And after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. Then said he to Thomas, Reach here your finger, and behold my hands, and reach here your hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, My Lord and my God. And then Jesus said unto him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, yet have believed. So here we see that there's kind of like a demand that's made by St. Thomas. And it's an interesting demand. I think it's one that perhaps many of us have kind of made to God in one way or another. Here we see St. Thomas kind of doing it in the sense of, I want to physically see, feel, and touch him. But how many of us have actually kind of put that demand onto God and saying, in terms of, if I want to believe you, I'm expecting to see you in a particular way. Could be, I want this promotion, I want this job, I want this relationship, I want whatever it is. We put some sort of demand or some sort of expectation on God, saying, I'm expecting this of you, and I want you to meet me there. But in this situation, we're often, I think the reason why a lot of us are hesitant to do that is because in the back of our minds, I think we know we're not exactly the person to be making these demands of God. Maybe we might do it out of frustration sometimes or out of desperation. But in this situation, actually, what was particularly intriguing, what really stood out to me when I was reading the story is that this is a demand coming out of fear. Because we have to put things in context here in terms of what was going on with the disciples in the aftermath of the crucifixion. You're talking about a group of Christ's closest followers who were absolutely terrified of what was going to happen to them. They had seen their Lord and Savior go through the worst kind of treatment. On some level, I think his followers knew that could also happen to them very shortly, with the Jews coming up and saying, well, you were followers of him as well, and we are trying to control all the damage that Christ did with his teachings on the Jewish, or in Judea in general. And the next step would be for us to make sure we get his followers as well. So I think his followers knew that they were in trouble. So they were in tremendous fear. And we actually see that, like you see in the stories about how they were gathering in fear. They weren't gathering just to have a nice meal and to chat. They were gathering in great fear because they knew they could be next. So they were living in tremendous fear at the time. And when I read the story of St. Thomas, I think he was saying what was possibly the concern of everybody in the room. That is, look, unless I see him, unless I actually see that he's here, I'm not sure if I can continue the mission that he has asked me to do. So there's an aspect of this too, in the sense of what kind of demands of God do we make out of fear when we are faced with difficult situations in our lives. And as you can see from the story, that God doesn't, or Christ didn't just say, well, you should have better faith. You should have, I expect you to be better at this. I expect you to be a more believing person. I'm really ashamed. He never shames St. Thomas for having this doubt. He actually tells him, okay, come, you wanted to see me, here I am. Now the Bible doesn't actually say whether St. Thomas took him up on his offer, but the interesting thing is that St. Thomas saw Christ in the manner that sorry, one second. St. Thomas saw Christ in such a real fashion that I don't think he even needed necessarily to follow through with the demand. It was just so real for him to see Christ before him, to the point where it's kind of like saying, all right, khalas, like what else do I need in order to really understand or believe that you're real? The other aspect of this too that I found was very interesting is that the demand that St. Thomas makes is coming from somebody who is actually one of the most loyal of followers. We often think of St. Peter as being, the one who was fully 100% on board with God, but and we also know from the readings that St. Peter was tended to be more of a hot-headed disciple. St. Thomas is actually known as more of the level-headed person. And you see that also in his demand. He's not kind of saying this demand out of anger with God. He's just saying, look, I'm having a hard time reconciling the truth that I've known and lived with, and that is God, and the current reality of the situation. This fear that I'm coming to terms with is not the same level of confidence that I had with Christ when he was still here and that I could see him. And I that stood out for me in the story because I think we need to kind of keep that in mind as well, as far as what sort of expectation or what sort of standard should we be approaching this kind of conversation with God when we're trying to say, I need to see you, or I need to experience you in my life. St. Thomas being somebody who is such a believer, such a loyal follower of Christ, and even he having his doubts, he kind of approached that doubt in a rational manner. He says, I know that you're here. I know I've seen you, I've lived with you, but I need to experience you in a particular way. And I'm looking for this level of experience. If you can please show it to me. And Christ, what we see is Christ's response to that. 8 days later, he appears to him and he invites him to do the very thing that St. Thomas was asking for. The way that I see this story is that it's kind of like Christ is telling us, look, if you want me to be in your life, I will come and I will meet you in the manner that speaks to you. But you have to approach that from a rational perspective. And the rational perspective meaning be reasonable in the sense of what is it that you're looking for? What is it that will truly help you establish a relationship with me? Because I think what we see is Christ could have just said, well, I showed up to 10 of the apostles and they saw me and they all believed me. Do I really need to also prove it to St. Thomas? According to the story, Christ said, yes, I need to prove it to each and every one of them. So that aspect, I think we need to keep in mind as well. If we are having any sort of doubts about, what are God's intentions for my life, or what's God's purpose for me in my life, let's think about what it is that you want. What sort of guidance are you looking for from God in that regard? And sit down and ask and pray and say, God, I need to see you in this manner. And it may not necessarily be that promotion or that job or that relationship. It could simply be, I just need to see that you're looking out for me somehow. And that actually, I can speak from personal experience in that regard. Like there have been times when I said, I don't necessarily know where things are going or what's going to happen. I just need to know necessarily that I'm not in this alone. And there have been times when the answer was very direct and clear and almost immediate, almost actually 8 days later. There are times that it took a little bit longer, but I think that when you make that request to God and you truly, genuinely mean it, you're looking for it to be able to say, I want to feel that experience with you, Lord. And I want to experience it in a way that will really speak to me. God will respond. There's the conversation that starts there, and it begins to look something similar to what we see with Christ and St. Thomas. But I want to go back also to this point about fear, because in addition to the disciples being very scared for their lives, like even if there wasn't an imminent danger coming from the Jews busting down their doors and taking them all away, try to picture also the dynamics of the group of Christ's followers. You had at this point, the group is still kind of reeling from the fact that it was one of their own, Judas, who had betrayed Christ. And on top of the fact that it was one of their own, Judas had by this point committed suicide. Try to picture the conflicting feelings that the disciples would have felt at the time. There would have been anger, but there's also a sense of, I can't believe he did that as well. Like, is that right? Is that wrong? There's a conflicting emotions that would have been happening, presumably. Saint Peter, arguably one of the most ardent and most fervent of Christ's followers, had denied him 3 times. And setting aside the feelings that Saint Peter himself would have been experiencing of guilt about that, imagine the dynamics in the group as well. Like, would the others have felt as impassioned and committed to the cause if one of the strongest of the followers couldn't even hold up his end of the deal? Then there's, on top of all of that, we have some doctors in the room, so you can imagine the physical difficulty and the psychological impact of witnessing a crucifixion. Nothing short of PTSD. You've got a very dejected, demoralized group of followers who have they're probably very disoriented, disorganized about what it is that they should be doing. I look at that and I think of the story of St. Thomas as being one of those rallying moments. It's kind of like Christ was a captain of a team that he was trying to rally towards a particular cause. We have to remember that part of the story as well, because Christ had at this point been working on, preparing his followers to really do the work that was going to come after the resurrection, that is, preaching the word of God. And I think Christ knew that this was going to be a very traumatizing moment for all of them, that crucifixion, and seeing that if the disciples and his followers seeing what Christ was going to go through was going to be absolutely demoralizing, dejecting, just completely take the wind out of their sails. But when Christ triumphs over death, completes the resurrection, and he comes back, he's not just saying, I'm going to come back to most of them. He says, I'm going to come back to all of them, because the work that they're going to embark on after my ascension is going to change the world, literally. And as we know now from history, it literally did change the course of history. It changed the course of empires. It caused our faith to be the most widespread on the planet. And that doesn't come by accident. It comes through hard work, sacrifice, and dedication over the course of your life. So when I look at the story of St. Thomas, I see that Christ is trying to tell us something. He's like, I'm preparing you for what is about to come, and I'm not going to just do it for some of them. I want every one of you to be on board with me. There's the last point I kind of wanted to make on this is I want to call it the point of showing up, because as we know, St. Thomas not being in the room originally when Christ first appeared was one of the reasons why Christ felt it was important to come back and to speak to him directly. I asked myself whether this story would have even happened if St. Thomas was in the room when he first showed up. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. It's kind of speculation, but the idea, I think, is the same in the sense of maybe we all have our doubts. Even if Christ was to appear right here and right now, we would still have our doubts about whether this is real or not. And I think that's more of a reflection of the times which we're living, where there's a lot of doubt about what it is that we do or do not know. But the doubt that we all experience, I think, is something natural, something to be expected. And I think the story of St. Thomas tells us that it's going to happen. And when that doubt creeps into your life, Christ is, I think, trying to tell us it's okay to confront it. It's okay for you and I to sit down and talk about it and to try to figure out why it is that I'm having this doubt. But I call it the importance of showing up, because just having the doubt, just having it in the back of your mind and saying it doesn't mean that that's all you need to do. The doubt that we experience is a thought that if it's just kind of left on its own, it can take you in very different places. And I think a lot of people who you might speak to that say, oh, I used to be a believer, or I used to go to church, or I was raised Catholic, or whatever phrasing they use, and to kind of indicate that the church or their faith is not really a part of their life anymore. To me, at least, is a reflection that that's somebody who struggled with that thought, but never really showed up to figure it out. They maybe confronted it at some point in their lives, but then after that, they just said, well, I'm not going to really bother to answer that question. I'm just going to, maybe leave that part of my life and try to live in a different manner. So I call it the importance of showing up, because I think that's what Christ is also calling on us to do. Christ is telling us you can have your doubts. You can ask the difficult questions, the kind of questions actually that, sometimes in our church, unfortunately, people don't like to ask. But if you have those questions and you confront them, you will get answers. And Christ is telling us that, and so I will give you the answers that you need that speak to you. All you got to do is just show up. All you got to do is be in the room, so to speak. And I think that's a wonderful story, especially in the sense of it coming so soon after the resurrection, because we tend to think of the story of resurrection as being like, it's a story of victory, yes, but there's also a bit of for the lack of a better term, the gloating, in the sense of, haha, see, Christ showed up and all you haters, you were wrong and he's really Christ. And that's not really what our faith is about. I think what Christ is trying to tell us is, I'm not here to, come in and bust heads and point out the haters and say that they were wrong and they were stupid for doubting me. Christ is trying to tell us through the story that, sorry, but Christ is trying to tell us, I'm here for everybody. Anybody who needs me, I'll be there for them. And the story of St. Thomas's doubt, especially, I think, tries to highlight that the strongest of us could have their missteps. The most ardent of us could have their missteps. And that's okay, but I still need you in this effort that I'm now going to be launching, in the sense of trying to spread the word of Christ, the story of the resurrection, the salvation of Christ in particular. I found it interesting when I was asked to do this talk that it was like the story of St. Thomas is the proof we needed. I was trying to reflect on what that phrasing meant. I think the proof that we needed was, at least in St. Thomas's context specifically, is St. Thomas needed proof that spoke on his level. And Thomas wanted something to really link his experience of the times with this, the Christ that he knew and walked alongside with. And when we read the story of St. Thomas, I think we should be also kind of asking, what is the proof that I need? Christ is telling us, ask for that proof and I will come and I will meet you where you need me. He's not just saying, shame on you for not believing already without having seen me. And we see this especially in verse 29. So this is the point where Christ has already come and he's told Thomas, come and see and come and feel. And Jesus says to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. And this is one of those moments, I think, in the Bible where Christ is actually praying for us, those who are coming after the disciples. I was reading somewhere that there's 2 times that Christ actually prays for us as the believers in general. One of them is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is the second instance where he says, blessed are those who believe. Blessed are they that have not seen yet have believed. He's kind of praying for us who come after the disciples, saying they will be blessed because they will have known me, even though they have not seen me. And I think that's a beautiful thing to also keep in mind, as we live the days after the resurrection in particular. We are reflecting here about what kind of experience do we have with God. We've gotten over the years, I think, used to, there's going to be the Feast of the Resurrection next year and the year after, although the last couple of years that has been kind of in doubt, right, with all of us at home. we tend not to take that, I guess, for granted anymore. But if you reflect on the experience of the last couple of years, I think this is a good time to do so as well. What was your experience like with God over the last 2 years? We were all forced to stay home. We couldn't really go out anywhere. And what was your experience like with God? Have you had this opportunity to speak with God and to say, I need to see you in a particular way that would really speak to me in the level of experience that I need? But in any event, the final thing I think I just want to say about this story is that for any of us who are having doubts, this is, I think, a time where God invites us to say, confront those doubts. Especially coming so shortly after the resurrection, and the church is trying to remind us, I think, that even though this is kind of long established truth in a sense, there's nothing wrong with saying, I have some questions. I need help understanding more. And that's something I personally have found to be the case as well, that I don't profess to know anything or everything there is to know. And I think I'm finding that it's important to ask questions and to get a better understanding of things that seem so fundamental and simple. And if even St. Thomas kind of had that experience himself and he walked alongside Christ, I'm sure many of us have the same experience as well. But yeah. Any questions or comments or concerns? Yes, Mark.
So there was something you said that kind of struck a tone with me, was when you said that he needed something in his own way to understand what's going on. And then you went on to talk about the challenge that he's done. And I don't know why I just kind of I remembered something like, I don't know, you guys probably encountered this when you're scrolling through Facebook, you get these random memes or pictures or something.
Yeah.
And one of them showed the challenges various prophets also went through. So Noah had his own struggles, with alcohol, Moses with speech, David with Solomon, all of them had their own challenges. And then it's just sort of beautiful to see the way that God works through humanity, despite the challenges that we face, despite our shortcomings. There's always a way for God to show his glory to the world. Through people who aren't
right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of to jump off of that, it tends to be usually during the weakest moments for the people, like all the story, all the people, the characters that you mentioned, we see God reaching out to them during their times of great weakness or great fear in particular. And the story of St. Thomas is no different. What really stood out to me about this story in particular is God is coming to somebody in the pits of their fear, like the worst times of fear for him. And he's speaking to him in a manner that really relates to him. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways here is, it's so easy, I think, to say, oh, I'm scared, or there's a lot going on in my life, and I really don't have time to try to connect with God. I'll try to connect with him maybe when things are a bit better. Right now, I got a problem I got to fix. I think this story is trying to say, no, this is the time for you to reach out to him. And maybe some of us tend to do that anyways. I'm so scared, I don't know where else to turn. Let me turn to God. That's okay too. Turning to God during your difficult times is kind of expected. And I think what God is telling us here is, do so and I will meet you. Just come to me. Right. Any other thoughts or questions, comments?
There's that when Thomas said, I need to see the prints of the nails in his side, he wasn't there at the crucifixion. So he believed through secondhand easily the fact that Christ died and he was pierced and crucified. So I find it strange how the bad news he was able to believe without having been there. Only John was there, so he probably heard from John or St. Mary. But the resurrection, he needed proof. So I think that's kind of like us, where like bad news we tend to believe really easily, or like when we think about a situation, it's easy to think of the worst case scenario very easily. It comes to us naturally. But it's always the good news or the happy news, things that things will get better or that they have been better. We tend to doubt and we question, is it really going to be that case? And we struggle with. And I think maybe that's what Christ is saying, like, you know, bad times will happen, yes, but believe the good times when they do happen, or that they will happen.
Yeah. I think there's another angle of that too, in that when we're very fearful, we tend to expect more, right? Like I think what I hear and when I read this story is St. Thomas was so fearful because of all the circumstances that had happened, that he was saying, look, I not only do I want to see Christ, but I want to see him at a particular level where it's like beyond reasonable doubt that he actually is here and he's walking among us. And that tends to happen, I think, when people are so scared, is they're like, look, I like, if let's say you're worried about money, right? You might not just say, oh, I need enough money to pay rent this month. I need rent for like the next 6 months. And I want enough food, and I want maybe a nice car and gas. Like that's sometimes the tendency that we might have, is we get so scared that we start to put certain demands about like, what's the minimum that I need? And what Christ is saying is, I will come and I will meet you where you need to be. But your point is valid in that, like the expectation, I think, was so high, yet still Christ came and said, even though I really don't need to do this, I'm going to do it because this is where you truly need me to be for you. Yeah. I think it's also kind of interesting to note that, like, the Bible doesn't actually tell us St. Thomas took up Christ's invitation. And I think that speaks to us in the sense of, what do we need to do if Christ is there for us? Like, like the story in the Bible says, after Christ invited St. Thomas to do that, doesn't actually say that he went and did it. He just says, and Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Like, it's like, I've seen enough. Like, I know that my demands are a little high, and I'm sorry, but I now proclaim that, yes, you are my Lord and my God. I think that also tells us about what we should be striving for. Like, we've got to be reasonable as well, in the sense of what it is that our expectations are of God. You know, if again, going back to that example of, like, you know, if it's a question of money, for example, is it reasonable for you to say, the only way that I will accept that God is in my life is if I win the $25 million lottery? May not necessarily be reasonable, but if you reach out to God and you say, look, God, having some financial security in my life is what I need right now, and he does provide you that opportunity, at least, and it's an opportunity where it won't solve all your problems, but it'll give you at least what you need to survive. I think that's being reasonable. Every situation, I think, calls for a different definition of what is reasonable in the circumstances, but being reasonable in what we expect of God, I think, is also expected on us in this situation, at least based on my reading of the story. Apuna, any thoughts? Good. Sorry, I went a little hard on the but yes, I think I hope we can take from the story, like, you know, especially last thing I'll say is the effect that fear can have on us is really quite tremendous. We're all frail human beings at the end of the day. It really doesn't take much to knock us down. And I think if we continue to recognize that and to look to God to guide us, it can be truly a tremendous thing. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely. Timing is never really in our control.
All this time, like.
Yeah. I mean, we can speculate probably, but I mean, it could have been a very long 8 days. The Bible tells us that they were kind of cooped up in a room. It was essentially like a misery session of all of them just kind of sitting there and waiting, wondering what's going to happen next. But that certainly could have been something that was on his mind. It's like, ooh, I guess he doesn't really care about me, or I'm not really a priority for him. But his answers were eventually, or he got the answer eventually, right? Yes. So, unless there are any further questions, that's all I have to say. Bye, everybody.